Welcome to the Soulful Laughter podcast, where me, Deanna Byrne, and my friend Grant Hatcher fearlessly dive into life's spiritual adventures with humor, insight, and a genuine zest for exploration. Through our own shared experiences, profound conversations, and infectious laughter, we invite you to join us on a path of self-discovery and spiritual growth. Welcome home.
Do that. Welcome everyone to the first episode of the Soulful Laughter podcast with Grant Hatcher and me, Deanna Byrne. We've done a couple of sort of off the cuff podcasts in the last few months, and kind of decided that, you know what, we'd like to try to do a couple a month, and so we branded.
Branded. Like official now.
We're official. We're official branded podcasters. So welcome. So Grant, how have you been since the last time?
Wow, it's been a little while. I feel like it's been like a month or two probably since we did our last one, and I feel good. It's like almost 30 degrees here today. You know, it's super warm out, which is really nice. But like at the same time, like, worried about all my friends in Nova Scotia right now who are going through a tough time with the fire there. So yeah, it's like mixed emotions, you know.
You know, there's so much happening here too. And you're right. Now where I am in Nova Scotia, I'm fine. It's not even smoky here. I was out earlier, and you know, beautiful blue sky. It's the wind that's horrible. Like we've got horrible wind. And I mean, it's challenging because you know, we've got so many firefighters on the ground, and I just pray that, I mean, whole subdivisions have been burned to the ground.
Yeah. I was away, as you know, this weekend with a few friends, and his house burnt down. He got back on Sunday, and within a few minutes of coming back, he had to evacuate, and yeah, his house was gone the next day. Yeah, it's pretty nuts. Yeah.
Awful. You know, we really don't know. We really don't know what tomorrow ever holds, right?
No. And I think that kind of fits into what we're going to talk about today, right? We're talking about grief. And I imagine my friend is feeling grief for his house. You know, this is a place that first house he ever bought, you know, with his little family and things like that, you know. Grief, you know, we think about grief when it comes to losing, you know, another human, somebody we love, you know, and that is obviously grief. But we can have grief over even smaller things, and it's a similar feeling in a certain way, you know, obviously a little different. And we'll talk about the human loss because you and I have, you know, lost people close to us, and I think, you know, that's something we have experience with. But yeah, grief is emotion that I think a lot of us feel, but it's such a not a nasty one, but it's one that we feel so uncomfortable with that we don't talk about it a whole lot, you know. So I'm happy we get to talk about it here, and I'm happy to kind of just you know, just shoot the stuff of what we feel about it, you know, and how we process it and where we're at and all that stuff.
You know, it's interesting because I actually did a couple of Facebook Lives through the course of kind of through the pandemic, you know, and through the latter part of the pandemic. And I was trying to explain to people, you're grieving because of loss. Many people lost homes, jobs,
yes,
friends, family. Like there was so much loss that wasn't necessarily connected to death, but it is loss. And you're right.
Yes.
We've got their grief. Loss is loss, you know, and with loss, there's just a natural human reaction, which is grief. Now, how one grieves and what they're grieving for can be very, very different. But you know what? Now, as an example, your friend who lost his home, you know, young family, first home, that's going to hurt.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I'm in the process of just getting my own home probably within the next year, and how exciting that feels, you know. So like I can only imagine what it's like for him.
You know, this is the thing. It's like everybody always says, you know, the stupid stuff people say. Let's just keep it real, right? And you know, people will say things like, well, you got insurance. Well, the thing is you're still grieving a loss. And yes, you know what? There might be insurance. Some people might have it, some people might not.
Yeah.
We don't know, you know, and we know insurance companies always step up.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, I mean, then begins the struggle. But
Yeah, that's the
so,
worst thing with insurance, all types of insurance, you know. This is something that I had to deal with, you know, with my dad who died. It's like, man, we gotta find insurances that he's had that we don't even really know that he had, because he's works in a union, he's here, he's, you know what I mean? So we had these little things, and then it was like we had to fight some people to get money that we were owed, which is like when somebody dies, or anybody who doesn't know, a lot of people I'm sure does know, it's like it's a busy time. You got to plan a funeral, you got to write an obituary, you got to hire a funeral home, all these plans and stuff. You know, everybody hopefully can come together as a team and you figure that out and you're not alone. But and then you got to like fight to get money that you're owed. Like, it's nasty, man. Like, my friend, who I'm sure we'll talk about a bit, his wife, who we left behind, my friend Clayton, who was killed in a car accident. He bought insurance for his vehicle, life insurance. But a common thing that's done amongst salespeople is they don't check this little box up at the top, because he's a young 30-something-year-old man. He's never going to cash out on this life insurance. They pocket the extra $5,000 themselves. And so here she was, not able to collect on this life insurance because somebody had screwed him over in that way. You know what I mean? So it's just like the things you got to go through after somebody dies. It's the practical stuff. It's like impossible almost. It's really painful. It's really hard to do in those moments.
And do you know what infuriates me the most is that not all funeral homes. I have met some genuinely compassionate people in that industry, but they thrive, for sake of a better word. You know, I remember when my husband died, a friend of mine said, "I'm going to the funeral home with you. You're not going alone." I said, "No, I'm going." He said, "Oh, no. You're not going alone." And when I got there, I remember I'm sitting down and we're talking about the stuff, you know, and I said, "Listen, he didn't want a big funeral. I'm just going to get him cremated. You know, we're just going to have a small church service." Like, I didn't want to have this big elaborate. Terry wasn't like that, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, he said, "Okay, well, let's just go look at what we have to offer." So they open the door and you go in this room, and the way it is set up, it is mind-blowing. Most expensive to least expensive, right? They're walking you through, they're talking about all these things. And then I just said, "Listen, like, seriously, he's going to be there was a $14,000 cremation casket, right?" I said, "He's going to be cremated."
Yeah.
Like, people pay $14,000 to throw that in a furnace?
Yes, yeah, he
said, "But it was red mahogany." I don't even know. And I'm looking at him like, "What?" And so I'm starting to fall for this. And my friend's like, "Okay, no."
Yeah.
You know? And so the biggest piece of advice that I can give anyone in this is bring somebody detached.
That's so smart. Yeah, that's very smart, because you're an emotionally vulnerable spot.
Yes.
And I guess at the end of the day, like, they're salespeople, which is crazy, you know, to think about. So it's like, yeah, I understand they got to do their job too, but man, what a weird one to try to upsell a fucking grieving person, you know? Like,
right?
Like, yeah.
I mean,
for an extra $3.99, you can get the red old mahogany.
You know what?
You know, it's like
a brass plate, like,
yeah,
you know.
exactly.
And I mean, I'm standing there and I said, "Wait a minute, like, can't you just like put them in a bag and take them to, like," right?
Yeah.
And he said, "No, we can't." And I said, "Well, what do you mean you can't?" And they said, "Well, we have to place him in a casket." You're driving him to have him cremated.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Minimum I could leave with was literally, I kid you not, you cannot make the stuff up, $495 cardboard casket.
Jesus Christ.
Right?
Wow.
And I'm like, you know, you picked him up at the hospital in a bag? I mean,
yeah.
It just, so you know what? It's these kinds of things that, and then what happens is, you're right, you're in deep grief. You're going through this stuff, right? And so you're not feeling that frustration until a few weeks later when you're like, what the hell?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You
Yeah, I
know?
think it's so smart that you had a friend there, or your friend was smart enough to mention that. And I think you nailed something earlier on when you said, like, we all grieve loss, but what it looks like for everybody is different. You know what I mean? And then, like you just said there, like, wasn't until a week after that you realized you felt this anger, frustration, but it took that time. And I think
Yeah.
when it comes to grief, we got to be really gentle with ourselves and other people about how it unfolds for us. Maybe, there's some people who don't feel anything for like a year, you know what I mean? Like they just kind of like, wow, like I want to cry, but I can't, and like, or I feel like I should, but I'm not, so like, it doesn't look the same. It's like emotions are different for everybody, and especially the grief process. Sometimes you start with anger, and then you might go to denial, or you might start with denial, or it's so I think that's really interesting. If we're going to get into it, what was your process like? How did it look for you? Like even over the years, like for me, I know I lost my dad. It'd be over 10 years ago.
Right.
And then my friend Clay, I think just over 4 years ago. So it's like, obviously tremendously hurt in the moment, like just like heartbroken. It's like nothing in the world snaps you to reality in a way than somebody dying. It's like, wow, why was I even worried about this thing 10 minutes ago until I found out about this? It's like that thing is completely meaningless. It's like life and connection is all that matters, that once that thing's gone. And then I think I processed the emotions for like a year and things are good. And then, I could be going along my day and just not feeling right or something. And then, years later, and it's like, comes back again. I'm like, holy crap, and then I got to have a little cry. I got to go through, not the whole thing again, but like
pretty close.
I'm heartbroken. Yeah, yes. I'm heartbroken. And that's going to last forever. Yeah.
And that's it. And an interesting part that I'm going to make a note, because I want to come back to this. But so my situation was a little bit different. So Terry had kidney disease, and he'd been on dialysis for a couple of years, right? And he was very healthy, overall healthy. His kidneys failed, but overall physically healthy. So in 2018, he got really sick in October 2018, and just right out of the blue got sick. His heart function lowered. It was not good. And his family doctor called me and said he's got days to live, right? And I called a friend of mine that I knew from the travel industry, and I said, listen, if this bothers you, you can say no, but I don't fucking know what to do. Right? And she sent me a list. She said, write the obituary, call the funeral home. She gave me this list of stuff. Right. And I wouldn't have even known where to begin. So did all that, called the lawyers, had his paperwork updated, did all the stuff, right? Well, then he lived. And so, and then, so he lives. And then I remember one day we were talking about it, and I can't remember what he was saying, but we had gone to the cardiologist, and the cardiologist had said, you know what, every day is a blessing, all that stuff. So we went back to the cardiologist for another follow-up appointment, and I'm sitting there, and the cardiologist is like this, right? And I said, what's wrong? And he goes, I've never changed a file from palliative care to restorative care. I'm like, what? And he said his heart functions up to like 42% from 4%.
Wow.
And I'm like, what? I mean, I'm in shock, right? So
yeah.
We get home, and I'm trying to process all this, and he says, what is your problem? Why are you crying? You should be happy. I'm like, okay, you know what? You need to understand that I'm trying to process going from planning a funeral to planning future. Right? So then I said, he goes, what are you talking about? The thing is, this is the difference with him. He never heard anyone tell him he was going to die. Right? All the doctors, it was like a scene out of Grey's Anatomy. They come in and they're all around his bed, and the hospital is, and he screams, "Get the fuck out of my room," right?
Yeah.
And he screams to get out. So they did. And so anyway, but he never had that conversation with them.
Right.
So we're sitting there, and he said, "Well, tell me what happened, because I don't remember what happened."
Right.
So I start doing that, and he looks at me and says, "Can I read the obituary?" I'm like,
holy smokes.
I'm like, do you know how awkward this is? But
Yeah.
So fast forward to when he died, it was a brain aneurysm. Nothing at all related to anything that we'd been through.
Yes.
Came out of nowhere, and he died.
Wow.
And so for me, I had processed, oddly enough, a lot of that initial, oh my God, stuff.
Right. You got the shock value almost pre-prepared in a weird way. Yeah.
And I also had all the stuff done.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So for me, it was a little bit different. So coming home after and going, so circling back to those initial emotions was shock, absolute unbelievable shock. Because so he was alive for about 37 hours after he was diagnosed with the brain bleed, right? And so, and he could hear me right up until the end. He was still, he could still hear me. He could still squeeze my hand. Like, he was alert right up until the end. That just kind of, you know? And so he also wanted he had a DNR in place. So he wanted so there were no machines there was nothing.
Right.
It was a gentle transition into death, you know?
Yeah.
And so when I left, I'm in the hospital in a blizzard. It's January. I haven't slept for 37 hours. I haven't eaten for 37 hours. I kissed him goodbye. I tucked him in. I walked out of his room, and I walked out of the hospital. It was like the scene in the movie The Green Mile. You know, this long hallway, right? And so then I drove home, and I'm standing in the kitchen, and our house had like a window over the kitchen sink. And so I'm just standing there, and I'm looking out the window, and I'm just staring out the window when I started tapping the sink with my hand, right? And then I'm punching it. And then the rage, it was rage. It was scream, rage, crying. It was, now I'm on the floor, because at that point the reality was setting in. It's like, oh my God, he died.
Yeah. It's almost not real, you know, like, you know, it's so hard to believe it, you know, like, wow. What an interesting way to have that scare like a couple of years before, and then, you know, to go through that again, it was almost like another shock with it, but like you're semi-prepared for it in a weird way. But it's that when you go back to your reality in some way, and you're in your house and you're looking out that window and you're like, he's never going to be here again with me, you know? It's like, it's I think the one that keeps getting me a lot is like, because my best friend, just to kind of tell his story a little bit, you know, he was just walking home one night and 4 a.m, kind of in the middle of nowhere, and just got hit by a car, you know, a really unfortunate situation. Just got married 4 months before, had a 3-year-old little girl, you know, life was just like grounding in perfectly for him, you know? So it was as sudden to be. That was like, he wasn't somebody who was supposed to die, you know what I mean? Like nobody, you know, like, you know, some people get sick, but he was young 30-year-old man, prime of his life, you know, ready to go, and just like gone like that. So that was like an extreme shock for everybody. And so like, just like hearing that news, and like, as the years go by, that like, him and I, he's my best friend. We have so many stories together, you know what I mean, that only involve him, you know? And it's like, and every once in a while, I'm like, man, I like have a little chuckle thinking about the story. And like, I can't talk to anybody about that story who will know about the story. You know what I mean? Like, I could tell you the story, but it's not the same as like, remember that time when we were walking down the road and like this, you know what I mean? It's like, you can't, that always like, I think is the hard part for me. Like, that you'll never have that again. It'll never be there. And and I think every once in a while, that feeling that builds up, that gets me is this, it's a heartbreak of that, my heart feels hurt in that. And like, literally I can feel like this pain in my chest, like this weight that's there. And usually I'll start to get cranky or frustrated before I actually tune into what it actually is, And the same thing with my dad, his was pretty sudden as well. So it's like just these people who you had such a deep connection with, like you shared so much with, and now they're gone, and you got to learn to create a new life without them. And it's like, you don't want to do that, but you got to do that. You're kind of forced to, and it's hard. It's hard.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because as you're talking about Clayton and a young wife, a young daughter, and all of that, this past week, my daughter, who is 29, and one of her best friends was killed in an ATV accident, leaving behind, like he literally messaged his girlfriend, said, "Hey, I'm on my way home," right? And she fell back asleep, 3 little kids, right? Dozed back off again, woke up, and he wasn't home. She dozed back off again, thinking, oh, well, wasn't too worried about it. Called his cell phone, woke up in the morning, called his cell phone. The police answered it.
Oh, no. Yeah.
And so for me, and maybe you can kind of chime in on this too, but one of the things that I've noticed after having lost, we've lost people, we lose people our whole lives, right? But when we lose people where it literally breaks us, we then grieve differently for other people. We almost feel this, like I felt this incredible, deep, gut-wrenching pain last week. Gut-wrenching. And I maybe met this boy at some point over the years. I don't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it was literally the fact that, oh my God, stay home mom, 3 little kids. Like it was just gut-wrenching to try to even wrap my head around that. So that's another thing too that I find is that when we lose someone, we actually, it's almost like any other kind of death now brings that shit right back to the surface.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because we have that same wound in our own way, and it's like, oh, I know that feeling in my way, and in one way, it's terrible because that reminder over and over is awful. But one thing I found too was like, I felt like an incredible connection with everybody in the world, because like we all lose people, and now I know what that's like, and it made me, in a sense, be able to connect to people who I didn't even know, who are suffering, like people across the world when a tragedy happens, not to say I can put myself in their shoes because everything's different, everybody's tragedy is different, but the loss of life, I understand that feeling. And so it's like, yeah, I feel it. And but it made me feel more connected to the earth, and like even like animals who have like, and I eat animals sometimes. So it's like, man, I feel that, like, I really feel passionate about that too, of like what it's like to lose an animal, anything, like a loss of life is a tremendous thing. Like, so in one way, as rough it is, it really made me feel so much more connected, I guess, to this earth and everybody here in a strange sense, if that makes any sense.
Oh, 100%. Because before Terry died, I didn't give a shit about houseplants at all. But now like I'm in there and I'm like, I'm gonna wipe off your little leaves and I'm gonna make sure that you live in, we got this, right? Because it's a living thing.
Yes. Yeah.
And you're right. It's interesting you said that, because I never really noticed that before. And I had a friend come to visit last weekend, and she's like, how are your plants so healthy, right? And I said, well, I don't know. And true story, I put rose quartz in each of them in the plant pots, right?
Yeah.
I literally put rose quartz in the soil. But you know what? I play spa music for them. I sing to them. I literally, like, people, some people, turn into the crazy cat lady. I'm like apparently the crazy plant lady. But before he died, before I really felt that kind of loss and pain, I didn't really, I was almost disconnected to life. You know what I mean? And now it's the same as you. Animals, people.
Yeah. It snaps all the shit away, man. It sucks that sometimes it takes something big like death to get us there, but it snaps all the meaningless stuff. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And it can also, though, you can go the wrong direction too. Like when somebody dies, like you can go down into that darkness and get really stuck there. And I think the rabbit hole, and it's very difficult, I think, even though I lost my best friend, my friend's wife, is the one who really truly suffered, because that was her husband, that was her child's father. So like the level of loss there, like when you lost hair, it's like, wow, this is my partner, and and people say things, and they mean it in kind ways, and it's true, but it's like, you will find a new normal, you know what I mean? Or you need some love or whatever it is, but it's like, man, it's like none of that is helping right now. Because I'm in it. I'm in the trenches here, and I don't see any way out of it. For me, I'm very lucky. I had some faith in life, and I was able to rely on that and kind of see the brighter side. But even then, like, it was hard at times, and a lot of people don't see that, and it's, what are some advice maybe, or things that was said to you that worked or didn't work a little, or, what about for you that, like, what kind of helped you or comforted you or anything like that as you went through that process?
Well, I had a really interesting scenario because, Terry died on January the 18th, and we went into a worldwide lockdown not long after, right? So here I was, our daughter in Kentville, our son was in the city, I was in Hansport. We weren't allowed to be together, right? So all of a sudden, you're going into this situation and you're now in lockdown. Now, what I did is kind of similar to what you did, is I tapped into sort of my knowing, and then I sort of shifted gears and tried to put on that coaching hat to be like, okay, guys, you know what? Like, I would do lives and I would do things to kind of encourage people and stuff like that, unknowingly deflecting the reality of grief is what I'm doing, right?
Yeah.
And so then I opened, we had a camper, a seasonal camper at a campground, and I opened that in May. And what I was finding was I would go to the camper and I would come back to the house. And each time I would come back to our house, I couldn't breathe. And it was getting worse and worse and worse. And in June, I literally spiraled and lost my mind and said, I can't do this. I put everything we owned in storage, and I walked away from our family home and proceeded to gracefully lose my fucking mind for a year. Right? I drank too much. I didn't give a shit. I just was so unbelievably detached from the situation. Right? Then what happens? So if we twist around to Chinese medicine and we take a look at how Chinese medicine connects emotions to organs, right? Your gallbladder, liver tend to be connected to grief and rage, right? Fast forward to 2021, I almost died. I thought I had COVID, and I was at the campground and, thought I had COVID, and I was walking out of the trailer when my friend Matt was walking by, and he's like, I'm taking to the hospital right now. And I said, no, Matt, I'm fine. He said, get in the truck. I'm taking to the hospital. He dropped me off at the hospital. Of course, we're full COVID, so nobody can go in. It was all so bizarre, And they get me in there. Next thing you know, I'm there's no ambulances. It was just crazy. They had to get me through to Yarmouth. My mother had to drive me. I've got an IV pole. It was so
Jeez.
so bizarre, right? Got to Yarmouth and there were no beds. Then they were worried about operating because my liver enzymes were so high. And if anything happened, there was no ambulances to get me through to Halifax. It was like every single stack was
Whoa.
against me.
Yeah.
Against me. They finally got me in the OR. I bled out on the table. Like, it was so insane. My gallbladder had died.
Whoa.
And my whole body was septic. And I had hours to live.
Wow.
And if my friend Matt hadn't have forced me to the hospital, I wouldn't have made it. Now,
Yeah.
it was my gallbladder. So all of that deflecting that I did, right? Guess where it sat? Bam.
Yeah.
In the body, you know?
Yeah.
And so I didn't go through normal grief. My grief, believe it or not, peaked in October 2022. And he died in January 2020.
That's what I'm saying. The grief process can take years, you know, like to truly feel it. Yeah, absolutely. And like I did something similar. It didn't get to that point, but it was like when my dad died, I like immediately saw the big picture. You know what I mean? Like I immediately saw everything. Like, you know, I still felt like the sadness. I did feel the things, you know what I mean? But like I did his eulogy, you know, I stepped up and did his eulogy because I knew what needed to be said, because my dad in the community was such a beautiful man, and he was a beautiful man, incredible man, but he was suffering a bit on the inside. Not everybody got to see that, you know, and he chose to take his own life. Like he chose to die by suicide, you know? So to me, in one way, yeah, I could see it coming, but at the same time, no, you couldn't, you know, but to the whole community, everybody's like, oh, like literally somebody said this to me, like, if he would kill himself, what am I doing here? You know what I mean? Like that kind of a person would do it, you know, like why should I keep living, you know? And it was like, it tore our community apart there for a bit. And I knew that like, I had to say something, you know, and spoke at his funeral and delivered this, like real, it was just like this channeled speech basically that came through me, you know, and like, it was a powerful moment, and I felt that, and a lot of people in the community felt that, you know, and you know, and I did feel my sadness and things like that, but like months and months later, I would be having these dreams of like childhood memories, you know what I mean? And it was like, oh yeah, like, but like little Grant, like who is still a little boy on the inside, is lost his dad, you know, and he's still very heartbroken, and I had to really feel that, like, and just be a little boy again in the sense, and really just cry and feel those emotions of, you know, what the little boy in me on the inside felt, you know. But I think because I stepped up so hard in that moment, it was like I deflected that stuff, you know, in a certain way, you know, and yeah, and that took months, you know, and sometimes it takes years, and sometimes, you know, maybe it'll never fully come. And I think that's the thing with grief. We all got to just roll with it, as you know, and it takes vulnerability to kind of get to the crevices that are in there.
And it usually takes a trigger, you know. And I mean, with you sort of latched on, almost what I'm sensing is that you almost latched on to sort of having to save the community, like save,
like I tried to play like a hero almost, or something. Yeah,
you know, versus kind of all that. And the interesting thing for me was that I couldn't even be there for our kids.
That's like, I couldn't even imagine. You can't even be around people like in that moment. Like that's, after like just months later, like that's, I couldn't even, it's unfathomable.
It is. And a part of it too with me is that as things were going on, and everything was sort of progressing with the pandemic, and they were making all of those horrid decisions about people dying alone and all of that was creating so much rage in me, right? Because I remember I remember how incredibly powerful it was to be with him in those last moments.
Yeah, it's a one of the most biggest things we'll do in our lives probably is die, you know, so to be there.
And to be there, like, so for me, and so both you and I are, you know, mindfulness and meditation instructors, and part of what I did through that 37 hours was I would watch the vein in his neck, and when it would start to protrude, I knew he was going to start choking, right? So I would watch it get to a certain height, and I would say, follow my voice, listen to my voice. 37 hours straight, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. And that kept him calm.
Yeah.
Right. And it kept him, he was able to die gracefully and peacefully.
Yeah.
Now imagine being alone.
Yeah.
You know? And that's what triggered me a lot throughout all of that.
Yeah.
Even though I still wasn't quite yet dealing with his loss,
right,
you know, head on, what was happening was I was carrying everybody else's, you know, a world full.
Yeah, that I like the fact that people, like loved ones, were just put away in a spot, you know, to just go like that is it's terrible. And to speak how, you know, grief can be experienced for many things. I think COVID brought tremendous amounts of grief for us, you know, whether we knew somebody who died by it, or it was we miss our friends, we miss our family, we can't go outside, we can't, you know, do these things that we used to do. And I think that created a tremendous toll on us, you know, and like I think just that period of time, we're still feeling the after effects of it. It's still like we're like kind of trying to come out of our little bubbles and learn to socialize again and do things, you know, like, yeah, we learned lots of great things, I think, too. But like, man, I grieved for a lot of things during COVID, like just physical activity, you know, like it's such a mental health thing for me. I couldn't participate in certain things anymore because you weren't allowed to, you know? So COVID was a huge one. And I couldn't even imagine for the people who actually lost loved ones during that time, and how unbelievably difficult that must have been.
So did you continue to have a relationship with Clayton's wife after he passed away?
Yeah, we weren't like super tight, you know, like but like I would always reach out to her and things like that and just touch base just to see. And this past summer I actually lived with her for 6 months. So we stayed together and spent some time together.
And how was that?
It was like really awesome in some ways, but like really difficult in other ways as well, because it was like, you know, it brought me in more into the immediate of experience of like, okay, this is Clay's house, you know what I mean? Like I'm in his house, and like this is his daughter, this is his wife. And like at the same time I was like working like guts out, like some 70-hour weeks, you know what I mean, last summer and stuff like that. So it was like I wasn't in any mental emotional state to be like processing a lot, you know what I mean? It was like I was in a grind, you know, so that was it's a whole other story, you know. So I wish it was more of a calmer, peaceful situation where I could have embraced it a bit more. But yeah, it was interesting. It was really full circle in a sense, like, wow, it's like Clay's providing for me even though he's dead, you know. I'm staying in his house right now, you know, which is really neat. And and it was really nice to get to see his wife and child up close, you know, even though it was spots here and there because I was so busy. So it was, it had its pros and cons for sure. It's really interesting time for sure. Yeah.
It is interesting because, you know, how I connected with a friend of my husband's last year, and, you know, we had never really met much or at all really prior to Terry's death. And it was all so bizarre how those sorts of things, different conversations, different whatever, would bring things to the surface. And you're like, where the hell did that come from?
Yeah.
You know, and it's really, and then it can be something completely unrelated.
Yes. You know? Yeah. So random, almost seeming like, yeah.
And so it's interesting because so both of us, when Terry died, I got this really nice letter from the hospital saying, "We're sorry for your loss. You know, there's you know, services available to you, da 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 da." And then it was this really interesting, like, you know, 2-paragraph what to expect bullshit, right?
Hospitals are a little rough, man. They're
I
they're
know.
very like dot 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 bull. All right, dot 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 dot. You know, like
Yeah.
yeah.
And I'm like, who the fuck writes this stuff? You
I
know?
know.
And so
Yeah.
then last week, I had something happen in my life that triggered grief for me, you know, because the other part of it too that happens is when you lose a partner and you get to a point where maybe you open your heart a little bit, right? If something happens in that situation and
Right.
that ends,
Yeah.
bam, now
Yeah.
you're not only grieving the loss of that relationship, you're
Yeah.
back
That's
to
true.
fucking square one again.
That's a great point. You know, how we can be, it's such a vulnerable thing to begin opening your heart when you've experienced grief, because
Yes,
you're prone to, you know, like to get that thing poked again, you know, in a certain
yeah,
way, you know, and
absolutely.
even if things are going good in a relationship, you know, you could have like traps in there that are like, oh, get away, you know, like that can push people away because of that, you know, and I think
Yeah.
that's I think a real skill we need to develop is to learn to feel those emotions, because sometimes the initial reaction we feel, especially in relationships, is the protecting emotion. It's the thing that's like, you might say something mean because you don't really want to go in here and feel vulnerable and cry and be scared because you
Right.
don't know what's going to come up, you know? So
Yeah.
it's interesting how, yeah, we can have these tremendous wounds, and then it's a scar that we'll carry with us for the rest of our lives, you know, and that it's going to get you know, poked from time to time. And you know, the analogy I like to use is like, yeah, we're going to have this scar, but a scar is better than like a festering wound, you know? And
Right.
so it's, you know, it does pay to do the hard work, even though it's hard work, you know, and even though it's never over, you never fully heal. You can't, because this person's gone. But you can have a nice scar, and it's better to have a scar than, like I said, that festering wound. But that takes time and practice, and it
Mm.
takes continuous maintenance, I'll say, you know, you need to flush it out every once in a while, because it can fester up from time to time, you know, and get poked again by another relationship or thing, you know,
Or anything, a song on the
anything,
radio,
a
anything.
song.
And
Yeah.
you know, I think for me, what saved me through that process, I don't know if saved is the right word, but helped me cope, was I was very vocal with my process. And
Yeah.
so initially when he died, I would blog, you know, and
Yeah.
very detailed, like I the one that stands out the most is a blog post, and I called it the turnip, right?
Right.
And I remember, you know, I'm in my kitchen and I decide that day I'm going to make a stew, and I'm chopping up all the vegetables, and I get to the turnip and the fucking thing is hard, and my knife gets stuck in the turnip, right? So I start tapping the turnip on the countertop. Next thing you know, I'm beating the shit out of the turnip with
Yeah.
a butcher knife, slice my hand open. There's blood everywhere. It is like, and I just kept whacking and whacking, and I couldn't stop.
Mhm.
Whack, whack,
Mhm.
whack,
Mhm.
whack. And when I wrote my blog post, I called it the turnip,
Yeah.
because, you know, but what that turnip did and what that brought to this, holy fuck, you know,
Yeah. 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 It can be something you never expect to just like, here we are in the
absolutely.
middle of grief. Yeah. 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 Grief's
And
good like
then
that.
fast forward to I discover TikTok, right? And so I start doing raw videos.
Mm.
Like, you know what? I'm having a shitty fucking day,
Yeah.
right? Or, you know, there was this one date I went on last year, and the guy ended up being an absolute, like, asshole, beyond asshole, that upset me so much that I'm like sobbing and all this stuff, you know. So then I would sit and I would watch them back,
Mm.
because for me, that wasn't shallow. That wasn't vain. That was so unbelievably healing for me.
Yeah.
To watch this. And then as I go back and I start watching, I'm like, look at how far you come, man.
Yeah.
Right?
There's something powerful about sharing. And like, I think it's easy to kind of shit on people sometimes when they share these things and like, oh, you're just doing it for the clicks or whatever, but it's like something about going live or sharing these things. It prompts it's healing for the person who shares, because you say things and process things in a way that maybe you were keeping it inside. You didn't know even how to say it until you said it. Like, I'm having a shitty day. I'm getting this out, and getting things out is like, you're talking about your gallbladder there. It takes the thing out of the body, and it's not stored in there, compressing in there. You know what I mean? And coming out in terrible, unplanned ways, So I think there's something very tremendously powerful about sharing, and something incredible about social media, that we can have that we do have these tremendous outlets, and we can connect with millions of people around the world immediately. I know, sharing about my process as well, about Dad, especially because that was one a while ago, and that was the first big one, and like, so many people, a big one, and so many people reached out to me, and like, and not only did they have comforting things to say to me, but what I expressed, I had people say like, you really helped me, man, because hearing your story about your dad, you know what I mean? It makes me want to like, and like, people like, even from that funeral little speech that I gave, like, a guy was in a land dispute with his brother for years, and he's like, what the fuck are we doing this for, man? Like, that's my brother. Like, I'm 70 or 60 years old now. Like, I don't know how much longer I'm going to talk to this man. I might never get to see him again. And they mended their relationship because of that, So it's like, healing can go both ways with sharing. And I think it's, if you feel comfortable, or even if you don't, you don't have to share, obviously, but I think we learn from each other, and I got a friend who's gone through some things, and he's like, I want to do a podcast. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to talk about my stuff. I'm ready to talk about my trauma, what I went through. And I think storytelling and sharing is something tremendously healing for all of us. And I think it's some sort of built-in thing that we all got, stories and telling our story. It feels good, and it also can help others. And I think there's something incredibly powerful about that.
It's interesting because I have a friend who we've been friends since they were like 13 or 14, right? And she is probably one of the most grounded, logical, like just an absolute beautiful, beautiful soul. So anyway, we're chatting Friday night, and I was a mess Friday. I was a mess Friday, and it was a rough day because in my mind, I lost 2 people that day, and it was gutting, right? And so Donna says to me as we're chatting, she goes, okay, listen to me. You know what? When you do your videos, somebody relies on you. Somebody out there somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
You're saving somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? Oh, talk about pressure. But, the other part of it was, what an amazing blessing that even though our journeys are so fucking shitty,
yes,
and raw and hard and brutal and whatever, that when we have dialogue like this,
yes,
somebody can walk away and pull something from it.
Yeah, that's I think the gem in all of this, and I think something I learned is that, even if we are in a shitty spot, not that we necessarily have to, but we can still contribute to the world, and we can still contribute beneficial things to this earth, even when we're suffering, we can do that. I mean, I think we got to make sure we take time for our suffering. I think that's so important. You need to give yourself time and space and allow yourself to go through your process. Yeah. And then, but at the same time, like, I remember like teaching a meditation class, for example, where I was like having a really rough day or things wasn't working for whatever reason, you know what I mean? It's like, I feel like the last person in the world who should be out here trying to teach a class to anybody. And then you go to the class and you just get in the zone, and like people are like,
Yeah.
wow, that was a life-changing experience. I'm like, oh yeah, I can still do good things here, like,
Yeah.
so I think it's important to remember that no matter what we've gone through, we can still help. And, I'm not saying you have to, but you can, and you have strength, you have power, no matter who you are, or what you've been through.
And I feel that is imperative for people to understand that. First of all, if somebody feels it necessary to judge another person for sharing, y'all want to just check yourself, first of all.
Yeah.
But number two, we all have a role here. We have a moral obligation, and whatever it is that's happening with another human being, we have a moral obligation to somehow, we need to get back to it takes a village, I guess, is where I'm trying to go, because we've gotten so detached from that, and then COVID adding to it. So, people, all of a sudden it became normalized and okay to allow people to die alone. And it's going to take a long time to get back to that not being okay.
Yeah, it's not even close to okay. Yeah.
It's not even close. And now we're at a point in Canada where our government is allowing assisted suicide to be used for people who are suffering from mental illness because of what?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's these kinds of things that we've got to get back. And so when you have situations like you and I who've suffered these unimaginable losses, keeps you grounded, man.
Oh, for sure, and like I think you nailed it when you did that, like coming back to that community thing. It's like we're missing that connection together, and like I do support assisted suicide. It's what you need, but at the same time, maybe there's some people, if they had the right community support, if they weren't so alone, maybe like this world can be so isolating. And I think we're missing so many systems and so many community collective things, that is required, or in the community, allowing people to die in a community, you know what I mean? Like, or be birthed in a community, like, birth and death, they go hand in hand. It's such a celebration to have a baby, That's what I think death needs to be as well. We need to honor that person in some way. But there's so many people out on our streets here, who are lost and homeless and addicted to different substances and just kind of floundering around, and nobody knows what to do with them. I don't even know the answer, but there's some sort of human disconnection, that I think you brought up there, that we need this community vibe again to reconnect these. And I think that'll go a long way. I think sometimes bigger is great, but at the same time, without connection, we're nothing,
Absolutely. And circling back to grief again, the reality is there are very few services available for people going through that. And so you rely on community. Rely on, community makes the little funeral sandwiches, or you know what I mean? Like you and I are both from very small communities.
Yeah.
And it has a very different, and fishing, seaside communities, it's a whole other way of thinking, And so for me, I struggled because where we lived, I mean, I had this lady from across the road. I'd never met her. She was my neighbor because we'd only moved in a few months prior to him passing away. And I remember the doorbell rang, and the front doorbell of the house, which nobody ever used. So I opened the door, and there's this little old lady there with this little plate of warm biscuits. Okay. And I'm like, are those like warm biscuits? And she goes, I just took them out of the oven. I'm like, huh, oh my God. Oh my God. Right. And so anyway, best biscuits ever. But she had lost her husband a year prior, right? And so like I say, we had not really been there. So we hadn't connected to any churches or community, like nothing. And she arranged for the service to be at this little United Church across from my house. Like, she stepped in, and I didn't know what to do
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
way, like, right? And so it's community. It's the my friends. Oh my God, my
Yeah.
friends. Like, they scooped me up. Like,
Yeah.
my friend Karen shows up with this big tub of chicken soup, and I'm like, I'm not hungry. She said, I don't care. Eat it.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's that kind of stuff, right? But if we don't have that, and what worries me is that the last 3 years has reframed people's thinking so dramatically around that, where you're right, death should be a celebration in a way, you know, um, in terms of you're honoring their memory, you are connecting together, you are sharing stories, you are sharing laughter, you are sharing
Hmm.
tears,
Hmm.
all of those things. And that is so incredibly necessary, you know, and the eulogy. When I wrote my husband's eulogy, and you probably experienced this with your dad's, that alone is an incredible healing process.
Yeah. Yeah. You gotta, who is this person? You only got a select amount of words to like describe who they were. And then, yeah, it's like, it helps you process a little bit in a sense. Cause it's like, oh, this is a real thing, even though it's, but it's, and then, yeah, there is a healing aspect to it for sure. Yeah. It like it makes it come reality real in a sense, and I think the sooner you can accept reality's terms, the sooner you can process it. Again, there's no rush,
Yeah.
obviously, and
Yeah.
even now 10 years later sometimes I forget that reality's real, and it's like, oh yeah, that person's dead. Or I'll have dreams where I'm like interacting
Yeah.
with this person and I'm like, oh, you're dead, and it's like
Right?
it's really interesting
Yes.
in dreams, so. And I think, all of it, going back to the lady and the biscuits, I think it's what all of this comes to. We need that human connection. We need those things. I know without our community and friends, like, man, we'd still be not knowing where to go. We'd be asked backwards, trying to figure all this stuff out. If it weren't for the people who stepped up and helped and, truly showed that they cared in certain ways, that's what matters. And maybe if we had more of those abilities to connect, then a lot of the problems we see right now in the world, I think, and how we process grief, I think, would be a lot smoother.
So if you take your situation where you lost a parent and then you also lost a best friend,
Mm.
any similarities, any complete opposite sort of reactions,
Oh
anything?
yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. So like dad again was like, he was sick. He had some mental and emotional things going on that he just didn't have an outlet, to heal. And that's a big reason why I do the work I do, because I try to create
Yeah.
healthy and easy outlets that people can tap into, like listening to
Yeah.
this conversation, that he didn't have, kind of not pre-internet, but he was never connected to the internet, you know what I mean, and stuff like that. So he didn't have an outlet to heal. So at least with dad, I could see that he was kind of on a path where the end wasn't going to be good, and then when it came, it sucked. But in one way, it was like, well, I mean, it wasn't unpredictable, you know what I mean? Could have, whereas Clayton was just it was such a sharp, like, wow, this
Damn.
healthy, vibrant human is gone now. And I grew up with Clayton and we were pretty wild kids growing up in the middle of nowhere, Cape Breton. I saw him nearly die at least 100 times. Like I
Oh
saw
my.
him fall over a cliff. I saw all sorts of stuff, that I won't repeat on here. And the fact that, oh my God, he just got hit by a car at 4 a.m. in the middle of nowhere. Like, what the hell? Like that, just like the shock that one provided was so like, yeah, it was like, that one felt unfair. That one was
Yeah.
like, man, just got
And probably
married.
still does.
Oh
Probably
yeah,
still
it'll
does, right?
never, and especially, there are still some questions about what happened that night, so that's up in the air, and we might never get those answers. So that felt different in that way. And and I had a grandparents who lot, who died, and like my grandfather. I spoke at 4 funerals. I've given 4 eulogies in my whole life.
Wow.
So
Wow.
uh yeah, so my grandfather, it's like a weird thing I'm proud of, but it's like, I don't know, like,
It is an
should I be
honor
proud of
though.
this?
Yeah,
Yeah,
but it
but
is an
it's,
honor. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And like my grandfather, he was he suffered for like 6 months, to a year. His mental health was going in and out. And not his mental health, but he was kind of slipping into like a bit of dementia and things like that. And that was difficult because it was like he suffered, and it was like, don't know if he's going to die. Like, oh, he went to the hospital again today, and then it kind of dragged on a bit. Whereas my grandmother, she just had a heart attack and died, so it was like, I think there's two ways. I think, especially when people get old and then, okay, they're getting to that point. It's like, there's no easy way to die because dying is so difficult, but for the people who are still left. But sometimes it's nice when they go quick in a way, but sometimes it's nice when that, okay, they're probably going down this road and we can prepare mentally, emotionally, physically, but it's hard to see them suffer, So I think every one of them felt so different for me for those reasons. And, at the end of the day, it was still the same, but they were very different too.
And same with me. My grandparents, I had very little emotion except for my grandmother, who, and I would say because I was older, but I also took 2 months off of work and sat with her at the hospital, and we spent day after talking and sharing, and I was doing reflexology, and I was, all that kind of stuff to keep her comfortable and all that. So her transition and what happened with her and I was beautiful. It was an amazing gift, But I want to circle back for a minute too about the stupid shit people say. So this is the public service announcement part of this, because my husband had kidney disease for a couple of years prior to dying, I would get stuff, well, he was sick. What the fuck does that even matter?
Yeah.
Right. First of all, or my favorite, you're young, you'll find someone else. Oh,
it's not what I want to hear right now. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then, and this is what triggered this conversation with you and I is I did a TikTok video last week about, what I was hurting, and somebody made a comment about, you're your only constant and you have to love yourself, because if you love yourself, everything will be okay. And I'm like,
not what this is about here. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what are some of your most interesting comments that you got?
This was one that really helped me. But it's interesting. I used it and it really didn't help the first one I used it. So it was when my dad died, some family or friends of the family who had lost their daughter in a car accident, were just kind of like said some advice, and I knew that they had gone through a loss. So I knew that they knew what this experience was like, even though they lost a daughter, I lost a father, a bit different, and they said, you will find a new normal. And like, even though we were in the middle of this fucking shit, like, it was a little beacon of light for me in the end of the tunnel. I was like, okay, I know we will all get through this. We will get through this together as a family. We will find our new normal eventually, even though right now it's like not here, we're in complete chaos right now. That provided some comfort for me. But then when my friend died, we're like, man, like eventually someday, like you will find our new normal with this. And his fiance was like, but I don't want to, she's like, I don't want to find a new normal. And I remember that just cut so deep. I'm like, fuck yeah, man. Like, why would you, you've had your life planned with this person. Like, what, there is no new normal, because she was so in the immediateness of it. And I think like when we're providing words of comfort, there's no real right answer. There's no one thing that you can say that's going to work. And, people even who say self-love, it's triggering, they're probably trying to help, even though it didn't work, so I think I think it's a messy situation, and it's, there's certain things you really don't want to say, but I mean, I think so. I took comfort in knowing that people cared enough to try to say something to me, a lot of the time.
Absolutely.
When people would reach out, like, oh man, like, because there are some people who didn't reach out, and like, I noticed that too, so there are people who did know, when I did notice, and I cared about that. So, I think as long as you're genuine and holding space is probably a bigger thing you can do than advice to be given, so, but I think if you just care and come from your heart, that'll go a long way, even though there's no true,
there is no true path. And it's funny because I sat down last night in preparation of this with you today. And it's funny because this knowing this was coming triggered my grief, right? And triggered sort of the thought process. So I had to get stuff out of my head. And you made me think of this when you were talking about Clayton's wife and her saying, I don't want a new normal, right? So this was it. After I lost my husband, I plunged into the depths of grief and despair. Yet I chose, in the face of unimaginable sorrow, to discover an indomitable spirit within me that I didn't know I had. And I chose to set a goal to rise from the ashes like a phoenix. With each passing day, I bravely confronted my pain head on. I allowed myself to feel the full extent of my sorrow and embraced the waves of grief as they came. Learning, this was the key, learning to not become consumed by them. In my own vulnerability, I also found a wellspring of resilience within that I didn't know I had, and a determination to rebuild my life on my own terms. And as I navigated the murky waters of grief, the phoenix rising started to find solace in the memories of my husband. I held on to our love, cherishing the beautiful moments that we shared, drawing strength from the lessons that I learned during our time together. Though he is physically gone, his presence lives within me, guiding me every step of the way. Through the darkness, I discovered what is called a support system, something that I would never choose to do in the past, but being weak and vulnerable, I fell into the arms of my family and friends, and they then became my pillars of strength. In the midst of my pain, this resilient woman came to the surface and began to rebuild her life. And I embraced the power of self-care. I chose to nurture my physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being. Then as time passed, I noticed that the phoenix rising, her wings were getting wider. She rediscovered her own passion, pursuing dreams that she had long set aside, and discovered and embraced new opportunities, and finding a deep purpose in helping others who are experiencing the same similar loss. Through it all, I chose to embody grace and courage, understanding that healing is not linear and that there will be setbacks and moments of incredible, gut-wrenching, and overwhelming grief. Yet I continued to get up every single day and determined to honor my husband's memory by living a life that he would want me to live, with love, purpose, and resilience. My journey from loss to resilience is similar to a phoenix rising, because I wanted to become an inspiration to anyone feeling the same kind of pain. And to remind them that in the face of heartache, we do have the power to rise, to rebuild, and to embrace life once more. I wanted to be a testament of strength to the human spirit and the transformative power of love and perseverance.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
You know what? I felt like I was writing a eulogy to my grief.
Yes. No, it's beautiful words. And I think it's a beautiful way to recap it. Cap this whole thing off is that we can rise up again,
Yeah.
we can step up again. And for me, everybody's different, but for me, I felt like a duty to, like, I felt, I know how fragile life is now. I know how easy that this can go. Like, I feel a duty to live and give back because, I want to help out these humans here, myself included, but it also, like, being so close to death a few times, it really helped me live because I know how fragile this all is. So I don't take this for granted. I do honor everything. Every once in a while, I'm like, God damn, this food is so good. Or this, I'm riding my motorcycle a lot, and it's like, man, this feels so incredible. Like, life couldn't be better. Like, and all these different things. Like, I live better now because I've touched death in a certain way, like, or I've seen it, and I think the way you explain it, rising from the ashes, you still have something to give. You're a beacon of light to help those who are still out there. And obviously, nobody else, you don't have to do that, but I think there's something very powerful in that as well. So
I feel that it allows us to take a really crappy, shitty experience and pull the gift from it.
yeah.
And the gift for me that I chose to pull from that is to fully understand that when I'm talking to someone, like as an example, there was a situation when Terry died, and Facebook, the reconnection of friends, right? People that from school and whatever. I got a friend request on Facebook a few years ago, and she's like, "Oh my God, are you the Deanna from grade 5?" Right? Anyway, we friended each other on Facebook and never really fostered that much, just kind of, oh hey, whatever. And when Terry died, I had so many people asking for my address and I just couldn't deal. So I literally just put it on my Facebook and said, here, just there, right?
Yeah.
Like I can't deal with this. I get a card in the mail from her. Okay. And I sat down and I thought to myself, I have not seen her since grade 5. And she felt compelled to go buy me a card, to go out and buy me a card, to write a note in it and send it. Fast forward a year later, her husband gets killed in a drowning accident. I sent her a message on Facebook and I just said, there is absolutely nothing that I can say other than I'm here for you. Right? We connected so deeply through that on an energetic level. Right? And I remember one night specifically, I just had a sense to reach out to her, and I said, how are you? She said, I can't breathe. I said, go get one of his sweaters and sleep with it. Just go, the biggest, fluffiest sweater, just go get it and sleep with it. Months later, I'm at Walmart in Digby and I'm coming out of Walmart and I can see her way at the end of the parking lot, and she's like, oh my God. And we're running and it's like a scene from like a Hollywood movie, like this slow motion kind of embrace, right? That is the power that we now have.
Yes.
Right?
Real, genuine human connection, man. It'll fucking save the world, this.
Yes.
You both know, like you said, this person you didn't know since grade 5, and but look what you were able to do for each other, her for you, then you for her, yeah.
And I'm, I don't believe in coincidences. I believe, as shitty as situations are, sometimes we're meant to meet people for whatever the reasons are. We're meant to do what we can for them. For me, the biggest thing that I've struggled with is people not understanding my compassion since he died. Like, I just want to scoop you up and I want to hold you and I want to fix you. And I just want to make sure that your owies are all okay. And they're like, wait a minute, what are you doing? Right? And I think that goes back, like you say, we want to fix everybody. So wrapping up, what would be sort of the tips, advice, anything that you would want to give anybody who suffers any kind of loss?
I think, first and foremost, you just got to give yourself space to feel it. You gotta, you gotta try to feel it. You gotta also know there's no one way, there's, what might work for me might not work for you, so you gotta have some trial and error in there, and be gentle on yourself if you're not feeling things the way you think you should, or maybe you're mad at the person for dying, and that's a weird one to feel, right? You can be pissed off, like, what the fuck did you die for, motherfucker? Look what we got to deal with now, that's a common one that a lot of people feel. So it's like, you got to have gentleness to go through this whole process, and trust your own self too, trust your own healing with it. If something's feeling off, then maybe you need to revisit the thing, but if you're feeling good and ready to try something different, then try something different, like trust your own, but at the same time, reach out to friends and reach out to family and ask for help. Like you have so many more people who love and support you than you realize, and they would be
Oh,
there in a
so
heartbeat
true. So
for you.
true. So
We're so hesitant to reach out sometimes. Those would be the ones I would say.
I want to circle back quickly to the being mad at them for a minute. So you've got two different, very different defined deaths. You have an
Mm-hmm.
accident
Mm-hmm.
and you have a suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Did you notice or do you recall the same level of anger in both situations for different things?
Yeah, like obviously more anger towards dad, like at moments because he chose to go,
Right.
even though he wasn't in a very good mental state at that time, he chose. So obviously there was anger there. Hard to blame Clay for anything that happened, but like mad at him almost like in a selfish way because I'm not going to get to see him anymore. Or mad at him like that I'm not going to get to share my memories with him anymore, like even though it wasn't his fault, like, so yeah, there was some anger there, obviously anger for the person who hit him, anger for whatever happened that night, and the shadiness that was handled with it, like some anger towards the police about how they handled the situation and the things they did and said, so there was different types of anger there for sure.
That is something that is so hard to try to, when you have unknowns in any kind of a death, whatever those
Oh man,
unknowns are,
yeah.
it adds so much more,
Yeah, it's
and
difficult to get closure. You can't get your closure
yeah,
as well. Yeah, it's very difficult. Yeah.
for me, I had to deal with being ostracized by my husband's family because I honored his DNR, right?
Mm,
They still don't speak to me, you know? And I'm like, you know what? I'm the one that had those conversations. I'm
mm-hmm,
the one that sat with the lawyer and did the paperwork. I'm the one who held him in my arms as he took his last breath.
mm-hmm.
Fuck you,
Yeah, yeah. I
you
mean,
know?
it's what you wanted, so, and
Yeah,
you knew him, so it's,
yeah.
yeah. Mm-hmm,
And I think that's it, is that's what we have to honor. And I think kind of in closing, anything that we can say to people is you're just doing it right, man. You know
yeah,
what? There is no book, there is no
yeah,
guide. Forget the 5-step bullshit, right? What does it feel like for you? But the biggest advice I can get is just let yourself feel it.
yeah, gotta feel it. Yeah, you gotta
You,
feel it.
you got to feel it. And
Yeah.
so how do you feel about kind of putting it on the table today? Did anything come up with you kind of leading up to this? Because I know I was a bag of toys all day.
I think I distracted myself a lot today and I was like not thinking a lot about it. I think I just kind of was like, no, I can't think forward about it. Like it would hit me every once in a while, like, holy fuck, I'm gonna talk about grief today. And I know what
And
that
I
means.
was like, ah,
Yeah, exactly. So, but you know, I feel like it's a topic that I feel comfortable in a weird way because I've given 4 eulogies and I've had people die, so it's in a weird way I feel comfortable with it. It's a part of who I am. So I feel happy to talk about it because like we said earlier, if it could help one person, then it's wicked, man, and if it doesn't, it helped me today to talk about it. And I'm sure it helped you to kind of talk about it.
absolutely.
So, so I didn't let myself think about it too much. And as I'm going through it, yeah, little bits, didn't let myself get full vulnerable and crack wide open on stream here, but at the same time, definitely
Yay.
jumped in a little bit too. So, and it felt good. Yeah. And it feels good to talk about these people because it feels like we're showing them honor in some way too, they're remembering them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
At the end of the day, I think you just made me think of something that I really want to address. Is one of the biggest things that I struggled with was guilt. I
Mm,
felt like I was overburdening people
mm-hmm,
with my
mm-hmm,
pain, right?
mm-hmm,
So I was choosing to not, you know, not reach out when I was whatever. And, going back to a few months ago, I believe it would have been October. And I had a friend message me one night and he said, "You okay? Because your Facebook's fucking dark, man."
mm,
Right. And I'm like, No. And he said, what's wrong? And I said, I feel like I did the day Terry died. He's like, oh shit.
Mhm.
Right. And that's exactly, in that moment, exactly what I felt like. Here was somebody who recognized it, reached out to me and said, like, what's going on?
Yep.
And I guess the biggest advice that I can give, for me, my outlet was either writing about it, doing videos about it. I didn't have to reach out to a friend. I just got it out of my fucking head.
Yeah. You got to get it out of you somehow.
That's right. So when I started to feel guilt about overburdening my friends, I found another outlet, right? So the biggest thing for anybody who's watching is when you feel that guilt, it's like you said, Grant, there's so many people out there that love you and they're not feeling pressured or awkward. That's all in your head, first of all, right? It's all in your head. But find an outlet, find something that you can express how you feel. Because when you get it out of your head, you make room for new. You make room for love. You make room for growth, for healing.
Yes.
For whatever.
That's right. Yeah. You got to get it out in some way. And just to finish it off, to add to that, if you're on the other side of this and you don't know what to say to a friend who's going through this, you don't know what to do, just try, just do something, like just be there, like that goes a long way too. Like we said, there's no writer, there's no one word or book or anything that's going to just fix it. Don't worry about fixing it. Sometimes just being there is all that's needed. So
the easiest thing to say, if you don't know what to say, is I don't know what to say.
Don't know what to say. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right? I don't know what to say. Or is there anything I can do to help?
Yes.
Very simple.
Huge.
Yes, it's huge. And you're right. There's people that I distinctly remember who were not there.
Mm-hmm.
I could never get past that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I remember too. Yeah.
Yep. I had a person who I was friends with for many, many years who said the words last year, it's exhausting with you just continually playing the grief card. Okay, well, it's been nice knowing you.
Yeah.
Right? So these things they do, they bring people into our lives and they also remove people from our lives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And simply be open to the process.
Yeah.
Love yourself, honor yourself. You're doing it right. However it is, you're doing it right.
Yeah, 100%.
But in ending, if you get to the point where you hit complicated grief and your head goes dark and you don't want to be here anymore, get help.
Yeah,
I cannot stress that enough.
Mm-hmm.
When you go dark and you want to go be with your loved one and you want to do whatever it is time to get professional.
Yeah, 100%.
Any final words?
Nope.
You know
That's
what?
it.
Our first official branded podcast, and we only went 20 minutes, and we only went 28 minutes over. Although, you know what? This is a big topic. So
yeah, it is.
Absolutely. I kind of figured that we would. So you know what? We'll brainstorm a bit. So for those of you watching, if you hung out this long, thank you. Grant and I are planning on doing a couple a month. And also, you know what? I think it'd be kind of cool to even have guests once in a while. So
100%.
Anybody who wants to come on and, shoot the shit and talk about life and the fuckery.
We're always down.
Hunt us down, reach out. Anyway, Grant, it was so good to connect and talk about this. I know that it is, it's a tough topic, but you're right. Tonight was really about honoring memory too.
And just teaching some of the little bits of wisdom that might help some people, maybe not, take what works, leave what doesn't, and find your own path. And yes, thank you, Deanna, for this idea and for having this conversation. Like I said, it's not always easy, but it's important. So thank you.
And we did it. Anyway.